There is very serious planning work underway right now under the auspices of the North Saskatchewan Regional Plan. Alex is here now with us to talk about this. This is not the first regional plan that's been developed for the province, but this is the third one in a series. Can you tell us a little bit about what this is? Because, I mean, North Saskatchewan Regional Plan, I'm worried people are going to have turned off the podcast just at the mere words, but I'm sure they haven't, because you're here and you're going to tell us why it matters.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I mean, it is a little bit daunting because there is so much involved here. It's a massive plan to deal with land, water, air quality, recreational areas, all sorts of things that really under one umbrella, like I said, it can seem a little bit daunting. So the idea, though, is to have a plan for this North Saskatchewan region that looks at cumulative impacts of different industries and different uses on land so you can deal with them. So if you have oil and gas exploration, if you have logging, if you have land development, if you have agriculture all happening in the same area, and those can all have, different impacts on waterways. But if each are regulated by their own set of regulations, their own industry regulations, but they're not kind of dealt with comprehensively, they're all going to have individual impacts on waterways. So the idea is let's look at this cumulatively. How is that going to impact, again, things like water or air quality, but also things like, do we need more conservation areas? Do we need more parks in this region? So there is a lot going on there. And I think that it can be hard for people to wrap their heads around, but I think it is important just because these are things that are supposed to set the tone for land planning in this area for decades to come.
When I first started looking into this, because I saw the public hearing notices of the community meetings, I thought, oh, this is going to be, right along the North Saskatchewan River. And then I looked and realized, no, this is an 85,000 square kilometer area that goes from Banff. It's weird to think of Edmonton being lumped in with Banff, but it is. And then to Lloydminster. So have you gotten any sense yet of what some of the issues are going to be along this route?
Like I said, I think that there's so many things that are going to be discussed. I mean, if you want to go out towards Banff and look at the Rocky Mountains there, I was just talking to someone yesterday who was talking about the need to maybe designate Bighorn backcountry, which is an area that I had never even heard of before, but is apparently a real recreational gem as an official park. He's saying, why has this been just sort of left? It's a huge recreational area, but it's not getting any of the supports that a proper park would have. So you've got something like that way over on the western side of the province, and then you come up to the Edmonton region, you can look at air quality levels in something like the industrial heartland region. How is that going to be set? I think for me, something that was a little bit surprising and something I need to still do more research on is, don't we already have these air quality limits and water quality limits? And I get the sense that there's sort of, again, regulations in different areas, but not necessarily an overarching umbrella that will tell us exactly what we want these qualities to be. I'm trying to think about some other things. So we talk about parks, we talk about air quality, and then you do have things like the North Saskatchewan River itself.
Right.
And again, what's happening with the water quality there, and the various uses that are happening on the land and what the effects are on the river and other waterways. This,
as I said earlier, is the third plan that's been in development. The first one was up in the Athabasca region, right? The oil sands area. And because that was deemed to be where there was the biggest, I guess, crisis in land use with all the various developments. And that ended up coming up with they've set aside a fifth of the area for conservation. And I think there's even arguments about whether that was enough or not.
Yeah, so we did have a huge swath of land up there, like you said, there's really intense land use happening there and tremendous growth anticipated for the region. So it probably does make sense to start up there. I was also talking to someone though who said, yes, those areas have been decided that these will be conservation areas, but have they actually received their legal designation yet? 2 years on, I think that's actually a question still. And if you look at something like the South Saskatchewan Regional Plan, where they're still in the draft stage, they haven't come up with a final plan just yet.
Which covers Calgary and again from border to border, right?
That's correct. So this huge area down south. And I did just speak to someone with an environmental conservation group who said that, they were hugely disappointed with what they saw in the draft plan, just in terms of trade-offs between industry and recreation or nature areas. They thought that those trade-offs with land use just weren't made, but still a little bit hopeful to see what changes might be made by the time the final plan comes out.
And it is so important because the North Saskatchewan River is so integral to the history of this province and the history of this region as a transportation waterway, as a natural wildlife corridor. We need to make sure that we are protecting it and also that we are getting the greatest benefit from it as, I guess if you could call it this, a public resource, a public utility. I mean, for years after Kananaskis country was established, after the Calgary Winter Olympics, people talked about, when was there going to be a Kananaskis North? And for some time now, there have been people like Saul Rollinger in Edmonton who've been arguing that we need to make the North Saskatchewan corridor our true gem as a community asset. And I think a lot of Edmontonians, we love the river valley, but we take it a little bit for granted. And we don't think about it. We think about it being in Edmonton, and we don't think about where it's been before it comes or where it's going after this. So I think it is really important that we have some kind of provincial policy that looks at the river, at the watershed as a whole. But I think it's also very important that as Edmontonians, we take an active interest in this, because the river is one of the defining characteristics of this city. It's one of our greatest natural assets, and it's something that we want to protect, and also to make sure we get the highest, best use of it as a recreational site and as a tourist attraction for our community.
Are we biting off more than we can chew, though, by doing it in such big plans? That's my only worry, and I guess they kind of go along the watershed. But, Banff is so different from Lloydminster, and, Edmonton is so different from smoky Provost, or where, it goes so far and so far south. I'm just worried that it just ends up becoming, in the end, not a particularly useful document.
I think that that's something that was brought up with some of the folks that I was talking to when writing the initial story about this, was just what sort of, how will the plan exactly be implemented? How specific will it be? How comprehensive will it be, and how explicit will it be? Like, it sounds great, right? Like the idea there to look at cumulative impacts on the environment and have a long range plan and to really look at all these things. Of course, that sounds wonderful, and it should be, it should be our default to be looking at the scene as a whole. But on the other hand, it's all about the implementation, and I think that still remains to be seen how it's going to be done.
I think the only thing we know for sure is that from the first two plans is that this is going to take a couple good solid years of work to develop, and then even still we're waiting for those actual cumulative impact numbers for the Athabasca area, for example, and that plan's been out for more than a year. So I have a feeling we'll get to talk about this many times moving forward.
People have a lot of time to learn about it.
They do, but they should go to the community meetings now, which, I don't normally say it, but I think we should all give our 2 cents now. So we'll see where this one goes. Thanks, Alex, for giving us that update.
You're welcome.